Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about karma police, or how alignment is reflected in video games and role-playing games. Now, as you know, I watch a lot of, or at least listen to, a lot of playthroughs, in particular Fallout. And I've been watching a Fallout 3 playthrough done by Many a True Nerd, very entertaining person. And he was doing this is past tense because he finished the playthrough, which is doing a you only live once. So one set of hit points, when they get to 0, he's dead. So it's a very stealthy style of game. And it's interesting to watch someone play the game as opposed to playing a character in the game. He's very much playing this as an arcade game. So it's a much different take on it than I've seen other people who are trying to play a character in the world with a particular personality and style of fighting and such, while he's playing the game to keep his character alive as long as possible. Quite fascinating. Now, Fallout 3 has an absolutely and utterly literal karma system. You gain karma points for doing good things, you lose karma points for doing bad things. It is somewhat nebulous about how many points you have, but if you have a lot of positive ones, bad guys that don't like that because you were now a champion for good and people start to look up to you, so they hunt you down to kill you. And if you have too many negative karma points or lack of karma points, people put bounties on your head and try to hunt you down and kill you. And if you run the rails right in the middle, neither group bothers you. But that means you have to keep doing both good and bad intentionally to balance this, which is, again, it's very metagamey. It's not how a real person would function. No one in real life who's not insane. This would be like Joker insanity of doing one good thing, or Two-Face doing one good thing and one bad thing, so that the karma was right there in the middle. But the system takes care of it for you, so there is no subjective influence at that moment. But the subjective decisions about what is good and bad are removed one level, because the people that programmed the game created a system of subjective decisions about what is good karma and what is bad karma. Now, what Fallout 4 seems to be doing is what you do for people. Essentially, what favors you do for people, or how you screw people. Do a bunch of favors, people view you favorably. Screw people constantly, people view you negatively. Dishonor did the same thing. If you screwed people and murdered people often enough, eventually even your allies would hate you and would do the absolute bare minimum to help you survive. And that is more in the control of the player, because you get to decide realistically if your character is going to be a good guy or a bad guy, and the game reflects that. But there is some still subjective decision making going on by the game developers about what constitutes good and bad. For example, at Far Harbor, it's really clear. If you do a bunch of favors for people at the end of the Far Harbor DLC in Fallout 4, you will get the townspeople to support you. And if you haven't done favors for them, or you've screwed them over, they won't support you. And that is very realistic. I really like that. So in D&D or Pathfinder, there are explicit, direct alignments. You can be chaotic good, you can be neutral evil, you get the point. And I've always liked that in my high fantasy. Okay? I don't like alignment-less systems, or systems that lack alignment, because I don't know if alignment-less is a word. But I don't like them in high fantasy. I like explicit, direct, well-defined alignments. But that means that the GM or the players in the group, that other players, can have to make a decision: is this specific player playing their alignment? And the GM is the person most likely to keep an eye on that. But the other members of the group, if they're all of similar alignments, I think that one of the players is stepping outside of what they're doing, is going to say something. And this isn't completely unrealistic either. If you have a group of cops who are all honest, yeah, I know it's a fantasy game, and one of them steps out of line, they may well put pressure on them to either cease being a cop, or to get back in line, or get rid of them. Okay? Or a special forces unit. If one of the members is putting the rest of the unit at risk because of their evil involvement, say they're peddling drugs, or they're cutting deals with people that they really shouldn't be with, they're trading weapons or dealing weapons, things like that, The rest of the group may apply social pressure of sometimes the more violent variety to get them back into line or to make them have an accident, which is also may call into question the alignment of those soldiers. But again, that's more of a realistic world. You might want to use something like the Palladium system, where the alignment structures are a little more reflective of reality. But when I run like a post-apocalyptic setting, I don't use any kind of alignment system. I base it purely on a system very similar to what Fallout 4's Far Harbor does, which is if you do good, people will think of you positively. If you do bad, people will think of you negatively. And it's that direct. And the consequences of your actions can have long-term effects. An example I've used in the past was in my old Overkill campaign, someone took a firearm off the corpse of a cop in a city. They came upon a scene where a bad guy had literally shoved a cop through a wall, and one of the player characters took a blaster out of his holster and went with it. And I was very clear. I said, you take the blaster off the cop. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. We moved on. I said nothing else about this. Days later, 2 cops show up because they've tracked the firearm because it had a locator beacon built into it. And he had never taken the battery out, the power pack, which would have disabled the beacon. And then he is arrested. He is found guilty for possession of a firearm from a police officer. The group at least can testify that he did not kill the cop, that he took it off of a corpse. And the rest of the group was in good standing in the community. People believed them. But he still was sentenced to 3 years in prison and was out of the game. At a later date, as an NPC, he escaped and became a mercenary that they encountered at a later date. So I kind of reused that player character as an NPC, actually long after the person that played him was longer in the campaign. But again, the consequences of the person's actions is what dictated what happened to his character. The player decided my characters are going to do this, and things happened to the character based on that decision. So I was the karma cop in that. I was the karma police, and I was basing it directly upon their actions. Now, the intent could have been something, I believe, was like his idea was twofold. One, it was a blaster and he didn't have one, and he was a bit of a mercenary. But 2, this might be useful in my pursuit of the bad guy. The court didn't buy that because the group was heavily armed. Heavily armed. Literally, one of the guys was carrying an anti-tank weapon on a gimbal mount, like aliens. So, yeah, they had the whole heavy weapon thing covered. So no one believed that he was taking it along, just in case they encountered the big baddie, which eventually did and they defeated, was going to be so tough they needed the cop's gun to do it. Didn't buy that. So that's the kind of the way I run in my post-apocalyptic games, based purely on what you do. And I've played characters in the post-apocalyptic settings that were rotten SOBs, that were not moral. Now, I would not play that character that way now, because my moral compass has changed. But at the time, that's the way I felt that the character should behave, so he behaved that way. It didn't run counter to my moral compass, because my moral compass was, frankly, not all that accurate. I've also played chaotic neutral characters in a high fantasy game, wherein it wasn't, I'll do anything. He had a little bit of wonky out Badger kind of character. If anybody out there remembers the character of Badger from the comics, that'll make me smile. Kind of almost crazy kind of behaviors, because he was kind of a wacky dude, very kind of Deadpool-like in some ways. But he was also deeply self-centered, and that's how I played the chaotic neutral. Okay, that's awesome. What have you done for me today because you want me to do something? That's nice. You did something for me yesterday. What have you done for me today? He was deeply, deeply self-centered. I was playing a lawful good mage at one point. The campaign fizzled, but my goal was eventually to have him become lawful neutral. His name was Canthos the Grey, and most people kind of felt that it was appropriate because he had a very dour worldview. He was lawful good, but he was a very dour, serious dude. But Grey was also reflective of his moral worldview because it was drifting from lawful good towards lawful neutral. Very gray in the middle. Are you doing things by the book? It doesn't matter if the book's right or wrong. Are you following the book? Yes or no? And that's kind of my attitude. It must be right because it's in the book. Yeah, a lawful neutral individual. That's how one of the ways I've always viewed lawful neutrals. So that's how I've run alignments in the past. And I think it was interesting to be watching Fallout 3 and 4 and the different ways they deal with karma. Now, I have no experience with the earlier versions of Fallout. I may hunt down a playthrough of that if I can find a good person, particularly if they have a charming British accent. I do so love those British accents. It's one of the reasons I watch many of True Nerd and Gopher. Both of them have wonderful British accents, though I cannot tell the difference about where they're from. I am aware that there are many different British accents. I cannot pinpoint them, though I do recognize that they are different regional accents if I hear them. The Gentleman Gamer, by the way, does an awesome collection of British accents, which comes as no surprise, he being British. He's also a pretty decent actor. So I'd like to hear, what are your preferred alignment structures if you use them, and how do you dictate and adjudicate alignment behavior? If you're using a system that has no alignments, like the way I run post-apocalyptic games, do you just kind of keep a running tab of the good things they've done and who they've pissed off and who they've helped, so that you could actually have a system where some people support them and some people don't? Not just enemies, but people they encounter on a daily basis that they're not all that warm to, and others that they are warm to, just like you are in real life. Even the most pleasant person isn't going to have the same kind of social capital with everyone around them. And that's really what we're discussing here, social capital, when it comes to dealing with alignment in that manner. So, tell me, how have you used alignment in the past? How do you use it now? And do you prefer one type of alignment system for different types of, over another different types of role-playing games? Or do you prefer, like, no system uses it, or all systems use like a D&D style or a Palladium style alignment structure? Let's talk about karma.